So I'm going to start with you, Kevin. What is your initial reaction? Tell me about, I think, I know some of the initial reactions you have from the receiver room, but there's a top three that everybody knows about. Very simply, we can't spend too much time on Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze. Tell us more about behind those three. What is your opinion on this receiver room?
Well, I think this is a loaded draft. And I don't think as much as we want the Bills to draft a wide receiver in round one, if they don't, I don't think we necessarily need to panic, because some of these guys, as we'll get to, you might be able to get them in round 2 or round 3. And maybe in other years, they would be a higher round 2 pick or even round 1 if you didn't have a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Neighbors or a Dunze. That's just how loaded this class is. Now, one guy outside of that top 3, I see some people talking about him in the comments here, and I think this is a good place to start because I really don't think the Bills are going to get any of those 3 that we mentioned. No, so let's start with Brian Thomas Jr., because I think this is like the prototypical perfect wide receiver 2 for the Bills. But can you get him? Because I think he's probably going to be gone in the top 20.
I would say so. He would definitely be a trade-up target. In how much of these assets that we're talking about would be the Bills' interest to do? And if they can't get him, is there really that much of a gap with some of the other guys that we're going to be talking about? That's the argument. How much of a gap between Brian Thomas as receiver 4 and Ladd McConkey or Worthy or Keon Coleman is there? There's been much debate that there isn't much. So at some point, yes, maybe he is the preferred guy for teams. We don't know that for sure. Everyone could have a preferred, just like a year we saw Jalen Reagor go above Justin Jefferson. Someone's going to have a preferred guy. And I'm not saying, obviously in hindsight, that's a really stupid pick by the Eagles. But look, it's the draft. And to sit there and say on draft night for sure that Justin Jefferson would be better than Jalen Reagor, you don't know that. Maybe you can scouts either way. Philadelphia scouts certainly did not think so. And they still went on to be a really productive team and still have been a good football team. So they know what they're doing in Philadelphia. So to be said, Brian Thomas Jr. is not the slam dunk receiver 4. The next thing you know, Xavier Worthy goes forth, or somebody likes something about Ladd McConkey, or somebody says, you know what, I really like the potential of Keon Coleman. I'm not sure it's a slam dunk at all. But anyways, I definitely don't know that the Bills need to trade assets to get up there either way, whether he is or not. So that's kind of where I stand. If he's there, I think it's a slam dunk pick. But I'm not in the camp to need to panic to get up to 20 because the second tier hasn't started to go off the board yet and have to give up premium assets and basically lock down your draft with just coming out with just that player. I don't know. That's where it's hard for me. So I don't know. What do you think? If you had presented an option to go up to 21 to take Brian Thomas Jr., are you doing it, giving up assets, or are you fine with them all being a similar tier?
Now, I see it both ways, because on one side, I think that Brian Thomas Jr. is a great prospect, 6'5", almost 200 pounds, and he went off last year with Neighbors playing on the opposite side of him. And I just think that he is just like that perfect wide receiver 2 that the Bills need. But how about trading back and getting more picks? And then maybe going back to our previous conversation, you find a team where they want to move back up into the first. Someone like Carolina, they don't have a first round pick. You work with them. The Bills have a good relationship with the Panthers. You say, hey, if you want to get in the first round, you can have pick 28. We'll swap. We'll take pick 33. And then obviously they'll figure out some other picks to give the Bills. But maybe the Bills could get Tyler Nubin, and then someone like Xavier Legette is there with their actual second round pick. So I think there is a lot of moving parts here where the Bills can make it work. But I will say Brandon Beane gets very anxious, and he mentions this a lot. He admits that he has to get held back sometimes. I mean, look, the last 2 years, he traded up for Kyer Elam and Dalton Kincaid. When someone like Elam probably would have been there, he got antsy and he traded up. So I do think that Beane would trade up. If they like Brian Thomas that much, I see Beane trading up. But considering the factors that I laid out, it also might make sense to trade back.
It could. I think that it takes 2 to tango. There's got to be a player at 28 that someone would want to trade assets for. So you got to go back far enough to make it worth it, right? So if you go to 33, the issue with 33 specifically would be you're getting a 4th round pick in return. And you're going to lose on the 5th year option. Do they need to add a 3rd, 4th with all those day 3 picks? I just don't think so. So to make the trade back worth it, you probably need to go a couple of ticks lower than that. So you're probably more looking in the, maybe the 40 range where Washington picks for their second time. You probably have to drop to 40 to get 40 and 67 to kind of more be in range of what you'd be looking to do. And that's still kind of an overpay by Washington. More you'd be looking at Atlanta at 43. That's probably the range. 43 you would get back in a trade back scenario, and 74. So if Atlanta, for some reason, using Atlanta as an example, if Atlanta for some reason wanted to come back up, that's pretty much on par with what it would cost. So you'd have to move to 43. So to trade back, would you be okay going to 43? Because that would net you that third round pick you're looking for.
Well, the other part of it that I was thinking of was the Bills could trade back and then use that extra ammo to move back up and get their third round pick back that they don't have anymore. So I think that, again, there are a lot of moving parts here where it wouldn't just be a simple trade back. You would be doing it to not only trade back, but then to trade back up later on in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible if, let's say the Carolina example again, 33 and 101, which is a top pick in the fourth round, you could conceivably make an argument, but the Bills really utilize that fifth year option to negotiate contracts, whether it was Deion Dawkins. They didn't have one for him, and they probably would have liked one. But what they're going to need to use it with Greg Rousseau. They use it with Ed Oliver. So it's going to be Bean always uses that to get himself a better second contract. So that's where it gets tricky. And they're definitely going to need it on somebody like Dalton Kincaid, for instance. That's going to be a very useful weapon to have in his negotiations in a few years down the road. So is that worth trading to get pick 101? I'm not there with that. But if somebody's desperate, I'm absolutely for trading back. But Brandon Beane gets antsy. He's notoriously said, if Kyer wasn't there, I would have traded back. If Greg Rousseau wasn't there, I would have traded back. Well, if Dalton Kincaid wasn't there, I would have traded back. And at some point, yes, the exception is interesting. I don't know that he has shown he could do it. He hasn't shown any interest in wanting to trade back, and he is into adding the best premium asset that he can add in this draft. So trading back makes sense, and then you could kind of combo it, but I do think you would have to move back a little bit further because you wouldn't be guaranteed, even if you got that fourth round pick, to be able to come back up into a equitable range that would make sense for the Bills. So we're talking about receiver still. We talked a little bit about Brian Thomas to kind of wrap him up as one of the best tier 2 players that would be on the board. Interesting player. He's smooth. I mean, he makes really good long strides and gets to his top speed because he's pretty good vertically. He's a willing blocker, which the Bills would be looking for. He definitely improved that footwork and release that he needed to fix in 2023. Doesn't have a lot of. We talk about this press thing, right? Doesn't have a lot of experience with what he saw in LSU. Everybody likes to knock Gabe Davis for that catch percentage, and that's definitely one that wasn't great. 2023 was better. I don't seem to care about, but didn't care about it for Gabe either, is that catch number, but it is something where he doesn't come down with a lot of his targets. And he's definitely not a rat guy. He does not make you miss after the catch. So that is definitely one of his biggest things. And that's one of the biggest things the Bills talk about. So I don't know that I love the player. I can connect the dots with, on his scouting report, not being a quote unquote make you miss player. So definitely will be a top 40 pick. But will he be the fourth receiver? It's an interesting conundrum as a team like the Bills really harp on Rack, or are they fulfilled with Rack with Curtis Samuel? That will be what we'll have to see. And can a team truly unlock the kind of threat that he is going forward? So he'll be an interesting key to the puzzle. I'm not sure he's going to be the Bills' number one target, but could be wrong. I don't think they'll trade out for him though. Let's move it on to the next couple players, the next tier of guys that are in Brian Thomas Jr.'s range. We're going to start with Adonai Mitchell. So kind of tell me what your opinion is on what you've been able to look up with AD Mitchell, any takeaways that you see from him. Fluid, fast route runner, got a really good quick release off the line, got that shoulder dip, knows how to get open deep. But, there's definitely he could do a little bit better attacking the ball in the air. He's got, he's had some weird quotes at the combine. The body language and effort has been questioned. If that's a thing, has to be seen. But definitely is a receiver 1, receiver 2, and people are saying could be T. Higgins. So what are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Well, I think the biggest thing that sticks out when I look at Adonai Mitchell is the fact that he admitted that he takes plays off.
Right.
And with that can come some lazy route running. And I think the Bills are trying to find a crisp route runner who does have those separation abilities and can get yards after the catch, because that's one of the things with Gabe Davis that they were lacking, where, Gabe wasn't the best at separating. And if you're getting someone who admits that he's lazy, I don't know if he fits into what the Bills are trying to build here.
It's an interesting situation. I'm sure it'll all come down to personal one-on-one interviews anyways, and those group interviews, like the Bills will really dive into what he meant and exactly kind of some of the comments about practice or route running or plays off or whatever that may be. Doesn't seem to fit. I don't know who that would fit though. So it isn't even just like a Bills type of situation, but definitely has some really good looking film. That the route running looks crisp. Definitely looks like a player that can contribute like T. Higgins did. He could improve a little bit more. You could attack the ball when the ball's in the air a little bit better. So that's something that's scary if it's me, but he makes a tough matchup with that 6'4" size and what he's been able to do. And he began his career at Georgia. Many people don't know that, where he won back-to-back national championships, especially with that quick release. He has that steady quick release, man. He gets open. But that's what the positives of him are. And is so fluid in that change of direction, reminding me of like a Diggs and Stevie Johnson, kind of just being able to get open like that. And he was a touchdown machine. Ultimately kind of has those pros of Gabe Davis too, of being able to get in the end zone. So far I've said that I don't think Keon Coleman is, I don't think AD Mitchell is, and I don't think BTJ is. BTJ is probably the most of those three, but would cost the most. The top three, any of those would work. So, we're not going to include them. But I think the next slew of receivers so Ladd McConkey and the next slew of receivers would all be fits. Let's get into some of them now. Let's start talking about Troy Franklin, another player that the Bills have done private workouts with. The Bills have seemingly been very interested in with his ability and his route tree. That looks pretty nice. What do you like about Troy Franklin, Kevin? Is he a guy that's on your board? Would you be happy with him? Is he a guy you're hoping is there at 60? Tell me about your thoughts on Troy Franklin from a Bills perspective, because he seemingly is a fit, especially with those long strides, that vertical that you're looking for. 6'3" does check the height box. That 185 to 190 is a little bit light. Hands catcher that you're looking for, that really nice footwork. Wasn't asked to run a lot of routes, but many people have said that he shouldn't have any issues with his route running, and really just the general strength is his only concern. But he's going to be a good receiver too in a vertical style offense. What do you think about him?
You said that he was 185?
Yes.
Because I thought that he was only 170, 175.
He's being listed as 185 right now, so I'm not sure. I thought there was definitely a weight increase on him, but I mean,
NFL.com, they have him as 6'2", 176. So I think that is probably like the main concern, because if I'm building that prototypical wide receiver too, he's going to be at least 200 pounds. So that's the first thing that maybe I shouldn't say scares me of Troy Franklin, but I wouldn't want that to prohibit him from working the intermediate routes and working underneath a little bit, because I don't want the Bills to just fall into the trap of using his speed to their advantage and say, hey, we're just going to stretch you deep. Now, if this was Ken Dorsey, they would probably do that. And I would say, please stay away from this guy. I think Joe Brady will know how to use him more. And actually, Joe Brady recruited him to LSU, or he at least tried to, correct?
Yeah.
So I'm more confident with Joe Brady that he will be able to work with him, but I just would be hesitant that he wouldn't be as much of a presence in the intermediate part of the field.
Yeah, and just an update at his pro day, Troy Franklin tipped the scale just under 184. Gaining weight from the combine. Franklin suffered the flu up to the combine due to his weigh in there. Report from that pro day was that's where the update would lie.
Yeah, they use those combine numbers on the NFL page there.
Yeah, so is a little outdated on the combine numbers, but are official. So it's an interesting conundrum. The Bills will obviously feel like they had. Yep, there we go. So someone said he had the flu at the combine, so that may make sense. Still, performed admirably well. The Bills like him. They've done private interviews with him. They don't waste their time, and I believe that he should be. We'll get more tipping soon, and maybe we can talk about it next week of their top 40 visits. So far, we've only seen a couple of top 40 visits trickle through. But the Bills draft from that straight up. I used to like fight it and he's like, no, it doesn't matter. They're top 30 visits, but it really does. Christian Boyd, the interior defensive lineman, who's like a 3rd-round pick, did come in on a top 40 visit or top 30 visit. So Troy Franklin has had a private workout. Nealand has had a top 30 and Christian Boyd has had a top 30. But more of that will trickle in very, very shortly as the days go by. But the Bills really do utilize that. They do. It's a tell. Like it's not, there's some smoke screening, there's some injury checks, but it's usually a fairly good tell. They draft from that list. Yep, there we go. So 184, had the flu at the combine. Is an intriguing player. I mean, I really do think that the Bills are pretty interested in him. At one point, I think people were thinking he was receiver 4 into January. Like, so he definitely had the pedigree of being the next guy after that, and has dropped just a little bit, maybe evened out. Yeah, I mean, I really think that like you can work on him with an NFL weight room. I think some of the skills that the Bills feel confident with. The Bills take pro days seriously, from what I've been told. They are a team that utilizes them even as much as the combine or more. So they definitely feel like the combine isn't end all be all. They want to go meet a player, see what he can do in a private, see if he fits the offense. Private workouts are telling to me. So we'll see. I mean, I think Franklin could be a fit. Well, the Bills take him at 28. They'd almost have to, rather than being sitting there waiting for one of these receivers to fall. So give me your final wrap-up thoughts on Franklin. Would you take him?
Yeah, I think I would. If the Bills like him, then I like him too, because I think that the weight issue and being slightly undersized is better to work with than someone like AD Mitchell with his attitude and laziness or sloppy route running, because I feel like that is kind of who you are. I think, like you said, if you can get Franklin in the weight room and if he checks the boxes on all other categories, so what if he's 15 pounds underweight as of now? He can gain some weight, he can get in the weight room, and you can work with him. I mean, if they like his route running, they like his vertical deep presence, then sure. I think that he is a worthy pick by the Bills, as I see Xavier Worthy is listed right here from John. I guess that segues into him. So what do you think about Xavier Worthy? Because he's a speed demon. And I guess I'll just share my thoughts, because for the same reasons that I just laid out here with Franklin, I'm not a big Worthy guy because I feel like he's just too small and too quick. And I know that that's something that you can weaponize with. But again, if I'm building that wide receiver too, he doesn't fit the mold for me. So like Franklin does more so than Worthy. So if it came down to those two, I would take Franklin.
It's tough for me to be disappointed in him. But the Bills could be pretty interested, especially with keeping away from some other the playoff teams that are behind the Bills. So we'll see how that all plays out. Leading us into our next guy, Xavier Legette. I believe a guy you really enjoy. A couple other people in the chat. Does seem to have his fans amongst draft Twitter and draft world in general. Seems to have a fair amount of talent. I believe is a 2nd-round pick, but I could be proven wrong. Got that 22 miles per hour on a play. He's dominant contested catch receiver, creates yards after catch. He's good against man coverage, huge catch radius, mentality to attack the ball. Josh Allen mentioned him today. Does not have great footwork off the line of scrimmage. His route tree is pretty limited, and there's definitely been some concerns against him against zone coverage and being able to find that, thus speaking to the route tree. So kick me off. What's your thoughts on Legette?
You know what? I think this one might be one of my favorite prospects for the Bills, and I think he might make the most sense. And I'll save my reasonings for why towards the end of this segment, but I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. Like, he does a little bit of everything. The one concern, though, we talked about concerns. Well, he seems pretty well-rounded, where he can do a lot of the stuff. Like, he's big, he's strong, he's physical, he can block, but he's raw. Because he had a lot of unproductive years in South Carolina, and he finally popped off his senior year. So that is going to be the main question right there. Can you get enough out of him? Can you develop him enough? But here's the thing that I want to point out. We don't necessarily need this wide receiver to be that productive this year. We would love him to be, right? Like, we want this guy, as I just mentioned, to be that glorified Gabe Davis, but we also have to think about the future. And even if Legette isn't as polished, because I think if the Bills draft him, he is going to make plays. I'm not trying to say that he's going to be on the bench and it's going to be a total disaster. I'm just saying he's not going to reach his ceiling until a few years from now. And that could work twofold, because that way it doesn't rush Stephon Diggs out of town. Because the more time that it takes to develop Leggett, the more time you're going to have Diggs. And those two might coincide, where by the time Leggett is ready to be that wide receiver one in the NFL, Stephon Diggs' contract is going to be up. So that's why I'm really starting to lean towards Leggett as being that potential wide receiver one of the Bills, but where he starts as that wide receiver two. And again, the Bills still have Curtis Samuel, who can do a little bit of everything to help soften that.